Thank you, Conor. Thank you for the introduction and for the invitation to be here. I'm always happy to take that very short trip from Wexford to Glentees. It's certainly a very beautiful trip, if not a short one. As Conor has pointed out, reform of Garda Síochána has featured several times over recent years at MacGill, and from the neutral perspective of Conor, I could have written down many notes about the timidity of politicians. Some tried for a very long time to push things along and ended up in high and supreme courts for their timidity. I think it is important that we do have this debate, even if it is perceived by some as a rehash of things that have been said before. But I want to begin, I hope, at first principles, in an appreciation of why society needs policing, and about who loses out if society is not properly policed. I believe that much crime is the result of poverty and disadvantage, of poor social services, of inadequate intervention at the earliest stages of development, of underinvestment in some disadvantaged communities. It's not enough to say that poverty produces crime. I don't say that. But we do need to appreciate that our disadvantaged communities are also the people who most need effective policing, because by and large they are disproportionately the victims of crime. From minor break-ins to serious antisocial behaviour, to the shocking level of gangland homicide that we witnessed in recent times, crime is concentrated where vulnerable people can least afford to endure its consequences. Of course, a famous former governor of Mountjoy said he could draw on a map the areas where virtually all his clients would come from in the future. The rest of us can become inured to this and can write it off as somebody else's problem. There is an occasional short-term commitment to areas such as Limerick and recently to Dublin's north inner city. But I wonder if the lack of permanent dedication towards the betterment of conditions for everybody, particularly in these most vulnerable neighbourhoods, isn't just an indication that many of us have just written some areas of our population off. For many in politics, there is no lasting, enduring dedication to investment in education, in early years interventions, to a sustained commitment to tackling poverty, or to a continued determination to eliminate notions such as jobless households. So my starting point is the reason we want reformed policing is because for these most vulnerable people, like for all of us, what we really need is effective policing. And the reason we want effective policing is because neighbourhoods in need are entitled to a policing service that safeguards themselves, their families and their communities. As Conor has said, the Labour Party's Garda authority policy goes back to 2006, during my last stint as party spokesperson on justice, and that was informed by my involvement in events in this county, in Donegal, in the Morris Tribunal, and all I learned during that truly challenging process. But one of the most telling points was made by Mr. Justice Morris in his 4 volumes, the single sentence that basically said that anybody who believes that what went on in Donegal was unique to Donegal was entirely disillusioned. The legislation we enacted, as Conor has rightly said, was not perfect, but its birth was torturous. For neither the first nor indeed the last time, and I'll be honest about this, my belief is that certainly our partners in government's commitment to meaningful reform of policing in Ireland was less than full-throated. But born of a political crisis involving the Taoiseach, Fine Gael's resistance to reform collapsed. And not for the last time. Progress was made on a very difficult issue when political necessity demanded that it be made. This also reflects, I believe, on the institutional resistance of the Department of Justice. And we can couch this in very many ways, whether we went into a recession, therefore people's minds were elsewhere. I don't accept that. A department, lest we forget, that was itself the subject of a scathing report from Toland, which we no longer hear very much about. A department which the one party, in my belief, most associated with reform, my own party, has never held. It's always remained the responsibility of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, or the Progressive Democrats. And what if the Department of Justice is part of the problem? I've long been convinced that the department hasn't seen itself as requiring the securing of accountability as one of its core remits. And it's very telling when you get to actually get into the heart of government, and we had difficult things like negotiating pay rounds. And it was very telling for me to see that the Department of Justice didn't see itself as on my side, on management. It saw itself as the representative body of the guards themselves. And that's a telling situation for me. When the IRA was attacking the state over a 30-year period, the Department of Justice and Garda Síochána stood in the front line against that threat. But what worked then doesn't necessarily work now. You can't truly support Garda Síochána if you don't hold them to the highest standards of accountability. The imperfections of the Policing Authority Act that Conor has referenced also highlight an impediment to serious public debate about the design of our institutions of state. And I hope that this new Commission on the future of policing can examine all these matters in a completely open way. I want to refer to the legal advice to the last government, that under the Constitution, policing belongs inherently to the executive branch of government. Therefore, we were told the powers of the independent policing authority would have to be circumscribed. I'm all in favour of close confidential relationships between government and its Attorney General. But when it comes to legislating, particularly for an area like the legislation for the oversight of policing, the government's legal advice about what the Constitution permits and does not permit cannot be held secret from the people who are designing the law. I say this because other eminent lawyers don't see where this argument lies, that our Constitution requires a government maintain a firm grip on policing. It is, after all, asserted in the context of a Constitution that makes no reference, even in passing, to policing. That might seem like an obscure legal argument, but it is an argument that has had, in my direct knowledge, direct consequences for the enactment of legislation. It is the reason why the Act says that the Commissioner must be appointed and may only be removed from office by the government. So we have an awkward and sometimes unworkable arrangement that we need simply to look at again. Look at through the eyes of this new Commission in the light of the relevant constitutional advice publicly available and debated. This is additional to the need for the new Commission to take account of the long series of investigations into Garda Síochána, from Morris to Smithick to O'Higgins and onwards to Charlton, and much in between. I think the most recent media revelations were the most dispiriting in many ways, because they seem to suggest routine, institutionalised maladministration. In particular, the stupefying news that Garda Síochána breath test data throughout the state, where it appears, and I'll use a word that Conor didn't, were systematically falsified. How else can you explain 1 million additional breath tests? And still months later, nobody can say why. And nobody has been held to account. 4,700 of our citizens have been wrongly convicted in the courts. Does anybody remember what happened about that? Has anything been done about it? Public confidence in the ability and credibility of Garda management has been seriously undermined. In particular, I believe Garda management has shown no ability to respond effectively to the modernisation agenda championed by the Garda Inspectorate, and we'll hear more of that. I was really impressed by the presentation by the Garda Inspectorate in their 2015 report. It was exciting, it was radical, it felt like a real shake-up. And for all the reassurances I was given as a member of the Cabinet Subcommittee on Justice about its implementation, it was given a speedy burial in my judgment, both by the Commissioner and by the Minister. Lately, we've been told in the Dáil that there isn't enough resources to provide the Dáil with any implementation update. As an aside, I think the Public Accounts Committee's findings published yesterday raise even further questions about the competence of Garda management. Nobody reading the PAC report could come to any other conclusion. And I should emphasise that Labour's reform agenda never was about senior management, and certainly not about any individual member of management. Our 2006 policy document called both for a Garda authority to create accountability, but also for a new model of community policing to travel hand in hand with that reform. Both of these initiatives are ostensibly being implemented, but both, I think, by any measure, are still very much a work in progress. In particular, we have a lot more work to do before communities can say that they have a real sense of shared ownership of the policing of their neighbourhoods. The problem is not just a cultural one, the term the Garda Commissioner frequently uses. It really is a structural one. We still don't have anybody with the power, the duty, and more importantly, the capacity to bring senior management into the modern age. An age in which effectiveness, efficiency, openness, transparency and accountability are expected as the norm and delivered as such. That's why we need the independent policing review now. I hope it will be radical, and I hope it will be comprehensive. We need proposals for future structures and arrangements that promote policing that is both effective and efficient, and also fair and impartial. A policing service that is fully accountable both to the law and to the community. And so much turns on us getting this right. If we are to expand the number of Gardaí, and we're investing hugely as taxpayers in that, they should be recruited into an efficient and into an effective force, using modern equipment and policing methods of world class. We also need a serious look at Garda formation and training. We need to ask if a separate and remote residential institution provides the best preparation for working life in An Garda Síochána. Would Templemore serve us better if it was merged into a third-level institution? This would mean Gardaí being prepared like our Defence Force officers, largely among an array of students in multidisciplinary colleges. More broadly, we need a wide range of educational, social and economic measures aimed at ending social deprivation and alienation. We need a serious debate about the fight against drugs and the contribution of law enforcement to that fight. The new drug strategy launched last Monday seems to hint at a health-focused harm reduction strategy as proposed in a bill drafted by Senators Lynn Ruane and Eoin O'Riordan. We need much greater urgency in tackling now the conditions that are the cause of crime and will be the cause of crime for the future. A serious concerted effort that can target young people most vulnerable and most at risk. There is another issue that should be on the new Commission's agenda. The policing service performs functions that are discharged by different agencies in other countries. And this was a matter again touched on in Conor's introduction. The price for setting up a policing authority in 2016 was that it got oversight of what I call ordinary policing, but not over security services. Some suggest now that we should go the whole hog, that we would create a standalone security service to enable the policing authority to have complete oversight of Garda Síochána. In my view, these are two separate issues that are being conflated as part of this debate. First, whether our current security and counter-terrorism services are fit for purpose, that merits its own debate. And secondly, what oversight arrangements should apply to policing generally. You heard from Michael Murphy and from Ben Tunra earlier in the week. Both were scathing about our lack of counter-terrorism preparation. Let's examine that criticism. If it's valid, if things could be done by a new agency, then let us go down that road, and soon. And let us do it for the right reason. Let us debate a national security service on its own merits. In order to carve out our security services from the oversight remit of the new Garda authority that we created in the 2015 Act, we first had to define what security services were. It centres on offences against the state, terrorist offences, espionage, sabotage, and so on. In other words, it's about preventing crimes, detecting and investigating crimes, and bringing criminals to justice, what would normally be described as a policing function. And there is no difference in principle between surveillance of those who threaten national security and surveillance of other types of criminal activity, criminal gangs, drug barons, and so on. It is all police work. So, perversely, often our advantage as a nation in coming late to a reform debate is that we can learn from other people's mistakes. Other countries have controversies about the creation of national security agencies that are not subject to any democratic oversight. So, in getting this particular question right, we must not stumble unthinkingly into that territory. The Gardaí are the prime guardians of our communities. They must be, and must be seen to be, part of the community. As the first Garda Commissioner, Michael Staines, put it, Garda Síochána will succeed not by force of arms or numbers, but by their moral authority as servants of the people. End quote. Under the pattern reforms, the PSNI became a transformed service that enjoys increasing acceptance and support across the whole community. If we can achieve something similar to that, then this should be, perhaps, Conor, the last time that this subject is debated at MacGill. Above all else, we need a changed mindset in government and in Garda management, a mindset that understands the need for efficient and effective policing, that believes in the need for a clear framework for Garda accountability to both the law and the communities they serve, and a mindset that sees no difference between these two. Thank you very much indeed.